The chair of the board is more of a moderator, facilitator, and organizer.
So how can we find potential board chairs for companies that are currently setting up their boards?
In most boards, I serve as the chair rather than just a board member. Believe me, it's not easy.
Part of this role is an art, part of it is knowledge and experience.
Potential board chairs, find a mentor for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel. And today we have a guest, Iryna Papusha. Iryna, good afternoon. Iryna serves as both a member and chair of supervisory and advisory boards in Ukrainian and international companies. She also teaches at business schools such as the Kyiv School of Economics and MIM. And today we'll be discussing the role of the board chair. Iryna, what differentiates the role of the chair from that of an ordinary board member?
On one hand, nothing. In terms of voice, opinion, and decision-making power, the chair's role is equal to that of any board member. However, when it comes to responsibility, the chair carries much more. Let me explain this first point a bit. A board functions as a single organism, a collective body. Its recommendations, conclusions, or decisions must be unified, shaped by the views and contributions of all members. In this sense, the chair is no different from the others. On the other hand, it is the chair's responsibility to organize the entire process so that the board reaches that unified, well-grounded decision that best serves the company. The chair has three essential elements: part function, part skill. The first is the organizational function, to organize the entire board calendar, the content of the board's work, the agenda, the duration of meetings, the number of committees, and all collaboration between members. At the same time, the chair must also be a true team player, not just someone who plays within the team, but someone who both participates and orchestrates the team's overall performance. Without being a team player, it's simply impossible to function effectively on a board. I very often compare the chair of the board to the conductor of a symphony orchestra. The conductor sets the tempo, the composition, and the preparedness of the materials for all the musicians. They elevate the emotional tone of the performance and, when needed, bring it down, guiding the entire process. And of course, the conductor themselves does not hold an instrument and does not play. The chair of the board is a participating member of the board. He also contributes his advice and decisions. We also know that in many cases, the chair's vote can carry decisive weight, sometimes even a double vote, yet it should never be a solo voice, nor should it dominate the rest. The chair of the board cannot be equated with a CEO. In relation to the top management team, the CEO clearly stands at a higher operational level. The chair of the board is not above other board members. Their role is to organize the work and carry the overarching responsibility.
That's a very interesting point you've raised, because indeed I often encounter situations where owners or even board members, especially those with limited board experience, tend to think of the chair as some sort of CEO of the board. That is, he makes the final decision and then essentially drives the entire work process.
But in reality, the chair is more of a moderator, facilitator, and organizer. Though sometimes you do need to say a firm no, a clear stop, or in rare cases exercise administrative authority. The key is to ensure such interventions remain exceptional rather than routine.
We know of boards that function extremely well, and they have a very significant effect and impact on the company's operations. On the other hand, there are boards that are less effective. In your view, how significant is the chair's role in determining that success or lack thereof?
I've seen a wide range of boards. This year marks 10 years since I began working in corporate governance. During this time, the number of boards and projects I've been involved in, including mentoring and advisory engagements, has reached a kind of milestone, 25 in total. As I mentioned earlier, my experience and career in corporate governance actually began with the position of board chair. I was invited to head a supervisory board from the very start. So later on, as my career unfolded, I realized that in most boards, I actually serve as the chair rather than simply as a member, and believe me, it's challenging. Sometimes I think I would just like to be a board member. It's easier, it carries less pressure and responsibility. On the other hand, a chair of the supervisory board can truly shift the board's direction, guiding it toward better performance, since that responsibility ultimately rests with them. There are, in fact, two common approaches. In the first, the board members are selected first, and then the chair is chosen from among them. In the second, the desired chair is identified right away and then consulted in shaping the composition of the board. The latter approach is, let's say, less objective, a bit more biased than the first, but it allows company owners to have someone to consult with during the selection process. When this process is carried out together with the future chair, it tends to produce far better results. I would actually recommend paying attention to this approach.
A board chair must have a certain kind of leadership, but not the same type as a CEO's. At the same time, a passive chair is also a serious problem. In other words, excessive activity isn't good, but passivity is just as harmful. So how do you find that balance? Is there a methodology or framework for this, or is it more of an art than a science?
It's partly an art, but one that can be trained, something you need to study and practice. I absolutely loved the INSEAD program I completed, Leading from the Chair. The theoretical part was valuable, but what truly made a difference were the simulations. We played out board meetings, switching roles. Someone would act as the chair, others as board members. And we were deliberately provocative in those exercises. Our goal was to make the chair's job as uncomfortable as possible. That was literally our assigned role written on our cards. And we, as chairs, were trained to navigate those situations, to recognize what triggers a particular board member who's making your life difficult, and to find a way to connect and communicate effectively. And that's not just about finding common ground during board meetings. I actually recalled the principle direct and protect, but there's another phrase I really like in relation to the chair's role: connect, expect, and correct. The first part, connect, means that as chair, you need to build a team among the board members. I'm not saying we all have to become friends, but there must be mutual respect. Respect for one another and for the expertise each person brings to the table. That respect, in turn, allows people to really listen to one another and at times yield their opinion because you recognize that the other person truly is an expert and knows what they're talking about. Even when a piece of advice may fall outside your own area of expertise, if it's wise and well-reasoned, it deserves to be considered. So the chair must also work outside of formal board meetings to build that connection. A sense of respect, trust, understanding, mutual support, and collaboration. Sometimes you need to gather just to talk, sometimes about board matters, and sometimes simply to maintain that communication. Next, the head of the board must bring everyone to a unified work plan for the board so that it isn't just a document imposed and drafted by the head, with everyone else simply having to follow it. No, the entire board should jointly agree on the goals the board aims to achieve. Those goals should be shared and distributed among everyone. The expect part also means setting clear expectations, that everyone understands what's required of them and moves consistently toward those shared objectives. And finally, correct, when something goes off track, it's the chair's responsibility to steer the process back in the right direction. Sometimes that correction involves more than just resolving conflicts or uncomfortable situations. Sometimes it means replacing a board member if they don't fit into the team because they are not a professional fit with their expertise, and while they can't fit into this team, they might fit perfectly into a completely different one. In this particular board, a certain culture has formed, and that person may simply feel uncomfortable within it. These adjustments must happen continuously, and that includes the process of evaluation. The initiative for evaluating the board's performance should always come from the chair. The committee can help structure or carry out that process, either conduct a self-assessment of the board or engage an external evaluation. But self-control should also come from the chair and be built into the process. Connect, expect, correct. It's a great formula, one that constantly reminds you, have I done everything I should as chair? Has everything been properly implemented?
So yes, it's partly an art and partly a technology. By the way, it's unfortunate that in Ukraine we still don't have such dedicated courses, neither at UCGA nor CGPA. No specialized programs specifically for chairs.
That's truly an issue. Even not all international business schools offer programs tailored to board chairs, though I believe they're absolutely essential, because the dynamics of a board's work depend heavily on both the technique and artistry of its chair. UCGA actually tried to launch such a program. They designed it, but unfortunately the group didn't form. I think that was in 2023, when the country still hadn't fully recovered from the war, and the program was planned to be held in Warsaw. It didn't go ahead, but the initiative was there. I do hope it will be revived in the future. And if we still don't get similar programs here, I personally incorporate simulations into the mentoring programs I conduct. I design games and scenarios where participants practice reacting to real behaviors with their peers acting as the other board members. And that brings me to the topic of toxic situations in boards. One of the biggest issues that can arise is when someone ends up in a defensive position. It could be a board member or someone from top management. Owners rarely find themselves in that position, but sometimes one person's behavior triggers another to become defensive. And this can become a problem both from the side of the attacker or the more dominant participant and from the side of the one being defensive. Because not every situation requires a defensive reaction. Sometimes it's simply a matter of not accepting a different point of view, while in other cases, there truly is toxic behavior, when someone constantly feels the need to justify themselves for every perceived mistake. This usually happens in relation to the CEO or the top management team, when they're reporting results to the board, and the questions start to put them in a defensive position. That's a very harmful practice, and the responsibility for it also lies with the chair. It means the board's behavioral culture isn't properly set, and it needs to be changed to foster open dialogue and collaboration. Because once toxicity appears, top management closes off, board members start behaving differently, that negativity spreads within the team, and eventually even the owners begin to feel uneasy.
Demotivation among everyone?
Yes, exactly.
From time to time, in boards where I serve as the chair, I encounter situations where one of the board members monopolizes the time. That is, a specific board member gets the floor and basically doesn't give it up to anyone else, and for a long time insists on pushing their own point of view. Now, that can sometimes be valuable, but given that board meetings are structured with an agenda and timing, it often becomes a real issue. On the other hand, if you make time allocation too rigid, strictly limiting how long each member can speak, that can also undermine one of the main benefits of a board: open discussion and exchange of ideas. So how do you find the right balance between strict structure and genuine dialogue?
Perhaps the right answer is to sense the moment, because sometimes you shouldn't interrupt when there's an idea that if cut off now, it might never come back later. At the same time, I completely understand the type of people you're talking about, the time monopolizers. Because it's not just an occasional situation, it's a personality type, and that person tends to behave the same way from one meeting to the next. Interrupting them isn't pleasant, even for the chair. It's better to have a private conversation afterward to explain that their behavior is creating difficulties and agree on how to handle it differently. Usually this brings good results, but not always. I've had cases where the person took it personally and reacted negatively, behaving even worse afterward, to the point where I had to step in and interrupt them during the meeting itself. In the end, the board's composition eventually changed, because when one member dominates, it stops being a collective decision. And usually such usurpers then start putting pressure on the management. In our case, there was also strong toxicity toward the management team, so we had to change the board's composition.
So, indeed, a lot depends on the chair in ensuring the board's effectiveness. Part of this role is art, and part of it is knowledge and experience. How can companies find potential candidates for chair role in newly formed boards?
That's a good question. I believe the key is to look for people who already have at least some experience serving as a board chair. Unfortunately, as we've said, there's still no formal training in Ukraine, but there are open international resources available. Even if you can't study abroad now, you can still learn through reading and peer-to-peer exchange and mentoring. Find an experienced board chair and ask for mentorship, for guidance. If I may, I'd like to return to the previous topic we touched upon, the issue of structuring meeting time, because that's a direct responsibility of the chair. I've seen many board meetings in my life that turn into endless management presentations, reprimands, and that's it. The board ends up not making any real decisions. In fact, a meeting should have 2 or 3 key components, where the main outcome, even if it doesn't take up most of the time, is the number of decisions made and the quality of discussion. If presentations take up more than half the meeting, that means the board is functioning ineffectively. All presentations should be provided in advance. They should be discussed beforehand, and during the meeting, they should only appear on the screen to reference specific figures, not for listening to reports or watching management defend their presentations. The meeting itself must be a space for discussion, with or without the executive team, focused on decision-making. And that's precisely the chair's responsibility. Otherwise, once again, we end up with the situation where we had a nice talk, but no decisions. Or we listened to management, gave them good or bad feedbacks, and nothing was done. The chair must structure the process, guide it, and adjust the configuration depending on the agenda and objectives of each meeting. Before we finish, I'd like to touch upon the issue of time efficiency, because we all understand how important that is. By the way, there was a study conducted by Korn Ferry International which found that, for example, a CEO spends around 3,500 hours a year working with company information. Meanwhile, a non-executive board director spends about 215 hours a year. That's 3,500 versus 215, a dramatic gap. And this gap needs to be narrowed. primarily through the quality of information preparation. This is also one of the chair's responsibilities, to organize the work of the corporate secretary and their communication with top management in such a way that reports are prepared concisely, containing only the information that's truly needed, not a 100-page tome stuffed with everything that happened in the company. Let them read it and die halfway through, as we sometimes joke. You know that approach too, right? So, it's about designing the right structure and clarity of materials, ensuring timely delivery, and maintaining effective communication when questions arise. All of this is the chair's job, and here they have a fantastic ally, the corporate secretary. I strongly recommend this role. It's extremely helpful. The secretary is, in many ways, the chair's right hand. Next, we need to think about how communication is managed during the board meeting itself. Classic corporate governance theory distinguishes three approaches. The first is full democracy. When everyone speaks, everyone shares their views, and then the group votes and the majority rules, not necessarily logic. Because, as we know, some decisions evolve through discussion. The right answer may only emerge during the exchange of ideas, leading to a consensus or even a completely new decision. But if everyone simply states their position and votes, and the only correct or rational option was 1 out of 5, then in fact democracy may have led to the wrong outcome. The second model is opposite dictatorship. Returning to your time monopolizer example. In this model, the person who speaks the most and the loudest often captures everyone's attention, pushes their opinion through, and others simply follow, because they sound like the ultimate expert who knows everything and whose way must be the right way. Quite often, this kind of dictatorship comes from the owners. They believe they know everything, they've already tested their approach, everything seems fine, but sometimes this behavior can also come from one of the board members. So there are two extremes that I've already learned don't work well, and there's a third scenario which isn't great either. It's what I call a CEO board, when the CEO, not necessarily an executive board member by the way, starts taking the lead. Even if the CEO is simply invited to the supervisory board, he might say, I've been here for 10 years, everything's been a success, the company is growing, I know exactly what I'm doing, just let me handle it. And sure, that's fine when things go well, but they don't always. Some decisions can eventually lead to negative outcomes. So this kind of approach isn't healthy either. There always needs to be a balance. Enough democracy to allow open discussion, but not to the point of decision-making paralysis. Enough structure and discipline to organize the process properly, but again, not to dictate decisions. Enough time and respect to truly hear the CEO, but decisions should ultimately serve the company's best interests in the most logical and effective way. And this is really where the art lies, finding that balance and the right governance mechanism. Understanding when and how to use the right approach that will produce the best results.
I'd also like to return to the topic of the homework that board members are expected to do. Of course, it's the chair's role to organize this, because board meeting time is extremely valuable. Spending it just reviewing presentations is probably not the most efficient use of that very limited and valuable time. The larger the board, the more difficult it is to get everyone together in full attendance.
In Western boards, where membership can reach 18 to 20 people, there's even a saying, less is more. So they're now moving in the direction of smaller supervisory boards, by the way. In Ukraine, I've personally never seen boards with more than 12 members, but even 12, in my opinion, is already quite challenging. Even on a single agenda item, by the time everyone has had their say, it takes a huge amount of time. First of all, it's difficult to get everyone together and agree on a time, and second, giving everyone space to speak and keeping the discussion productive with that many board members is not easy. So again, we need to stay logical to understand how many people are truly needed, and remember that more is not always better, that's for sure.
Board members, of course, gain significant intangible value from serving on a board. It's interesting, it's inspiring, and it's intellectually rewarding. But do chairs get that same or another kind of intangible benefit?
I'd say yes, beyond what you already get as a regular board member. When you've managed to build a board that runs smoothly, operates like clockwork, and where everyone feels motivated and values their contribution, that's genuinely rewarding for the chair personally. But to be honest, the responsibility is higher and the workload is heavier. Not every board runs exactly the way you envision, in such harmony with everyone on the same wavelength. And by same wavelength, I don't mean thinking alike, I mean being united in the desire to do what's best for the company. I currently have a few boards where honestly it's a real pleasure to watch how each member approaches problem solving. And actually there's a great indicator of an effective board, how well you manage the time. I've noticed that in the boards where the atmosphere is truly great and our work feels seamless, we often finish earlier than planned. Even when we invite top managers to present and have plenty of questions, we still stay within the schedule, sometimes even ahead. because we're so aligned in finding the right decision that the time simply works for us. So, in a way, time becomes one of the indicators of an effective board.
Iryna, what advice would you give to board members who are ready to consider becoming a chair as their next career step?
I'd say start by finding balance, first of all, in life itself. Once you have that, it will naturally reflect in how you operate on a board. You need to be able to manage yourself, especially when managing others. Because the board is a group of leaders, top leaders from large organizations, people with deep experience. You can only lead such leaders through inspiration, understanding, and transformation, never through administrative control or authority. So, it's worth asking yourself, are you ready for that kind of role? And if the answer is yes, then start practicing the art of building a team out of stars. Build your own star team. You have to understand, stepping into a boardroom is a bit like walking into a cage with tigers. Every one of them is a star in their own right. And your job is to get all those tigers to agree that now we're going to perform together. And that our performance should leave the audience, meaning the company and its stakeholders, with the best emotions and the best results. Believe me, everyone around that table wants success for the company because that success is something they ultimately share. And if you know how to build teamwork, how to turn that group of strong personalities into a true team, the results will come very quickly. But that's a skill you really need to learn, or at least absorb from someone with experience. So, to anyone aspiring to become a board chair, find yourself a mentor and learn everything you possibly can from them.
Thank you so much, Iryna, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. See you in our next episodes.